I would like then today to present to you, through the cosmic window, a universal view. Gazing up through the cosmic window on a clear night, we see hundreds of stars, Cepheus and Cassiopeia, the Plough or Ursa Major, and the beautiful Pleiades. We are reminded of Paul's statement, "One star differeth from another star in glory," and the variation we see in stellar magnitude reveals what we can see in any crowd, differences between people. To enhance each man's quest for a unique identity in life or in God is the purpose of the Summit Lighthouse. From our planetary home, we reach out to arbitrarily fix our position in space. Man, the observer of the universe, known and unknown, may also be the knower and the known. We pride ourselves in the organon, or instrument of knowledge, the ars logica, upon which we base our understanding of life, in the structuring of our observations, in our agreements and disagreements with the findings of others, and in our evaluation of micro, mega, and macro evolutions, genetics in time. But these instruments often fail to tell us that moral purpose was embedded in the evolutionary process from the beginning. For regardless of the magnificent attainments of science, it has not satisfactorily given account for the presence in man and nature of order, morality, beauty, truth, and self-awareness, which we hold is by reason of a divine derivative inherent within the soul. Thus, to discover his individuality and his permanent reality, man must go beyond the known, the observable. He must pursue contact with his inner self. But man need not be limited by even his own speculations of life, for there is a foolproof method of finding reality, as the teachings published by the Summit Lighthouse clearly reveal. Yet, in the individual mind of man, there remain questioning, doubts, and fears which light overcomes. As Henry Wadsworth Longfellow said in his poem, "The Haunted Chamber," each heart has its haunted chamber where the silent moonlight falls. On the floor are mysterious footsteps. There are whispers along the walls. And mine at times is haunted by phantoms of the past, as motionless as shadows by the silent moonlight cast. A form sits by the window that is not seen by day, for as soon as the dawn approaches, it vanishes away. Man needs balance in evolving a cogent meaning out of his structure of identity. Jesus Christ said, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." Thus he indicated that there is a relationship between what and how we see and what we become. Man needs the power of a renewed vision. Georgius Kepis, in his book, Education of Vision, states that vision, quote, "is the key to man's creative power." We have lost the benefit of natural guides because we are surrounded by the second nature of our man-made environment, not grown according to nature, but shaped by one and short-sighted interests. He says, quote, "Images imitate forms. Forms cheat functions. Functions are robbed of their natural sources emanating from human needs. Our cities, our buildings counterfeit inside and out, objects for use, the packaging of goods, posters, the advertising in our newspapers, even our clothes, our gestures, our physiognomies are often without visual integrity. The world that modern man has constructed by and large lacks sincerity and scale. It is twisted in space without light and cowardly in color. It combines mechanically consistent patterns of details within formless wholes. It is oppressive in its fake monumentality, degrading in its petty, fawning manner of face-lifting. Men living in this environment, injured emotionally and intellectually by the terrific odds of their compassless society, cannot avoid injury to their sensibilities, the basis of their creative faculties. Unquote. The pollution of our environment has polluted our vision. Hence, our true identity often remains cloaked from our perception. Man does not know himself, and evolving out of the darkening concepts he holds for himself, he remains in a twilight zone of self-awareness. Throughout history, explanations have been given as to the origin and meaning of life. Understandably, some of these possess greater appeal than others. Nevertheless, the complete and final explanation remains to be given. Today we live in the midst of a giant technological splendor, a splendor that is turning the masses away from the divinity of the soul within toward the increasing materialism that is without. Does modern man recognize the wondrous mind inherent within cosmos? Does he comprehend the mysticism of Thomas à Kempis, of Origen of Alexandria, or even the late mystic Edgar Cayce? In our time, Henry Ford's automobile is hardly recognized as an achievement. Now airplanes, jets, rockets, and spaceships capture our fancy. We have landed men on the moon and maintained contact with these men by radio and television. We have placed a television satellite in orbit around Mars. We have perfected systems of sight and sound recording and visual aids to convey and test knowledge. We have conquered the elements and harnessed the energies of the atom, but we have utterly failed to master ourselves in the process. If we as individuals are to conquer the day-to-day problems which challenge us, we must realize the necessity of goal-fitting. And to assist man in the achievement of goal-fittedness or of self-mastery is the purpose of the Summit Lighthouse. According to Dr. Jose M.R. Delgado of the Department of Psychiatry at Yale, the root of our problem lies in the fact that our conduct is burdened by a lag of 50,000 years between our emotional and technological evolution. He states that there is a self-perpetuating imbalance between materialism and the psyche, that we are too materialized and not sufficiently mentalized. Let's face it, most people feel that they are on a roller coaster. They can't stand up without falling off, yet they don't want to sit down. They often feel they are going nowhere, that the mass direction of life is toward mediocrity. We tend today to stereotype ourselves in the image of one another, to cater almost exclusively to popularity, to worship at the shrine of the cult of success. And there is a tendency for people to criticize each other, even for the same mistakes which they themselves make. The reason people can't adapt to our technological environment is that they fail to recognize that the basis of life in man is God. God's spirit is mobile, creating at will. He is a prime mover of time and space. Man's soul, created out of God's spirit, remembers the freedom it once knew but is now deprived of by his environment. Therefore, his soul longing often gives rise to unexplained dichotomies within the personality. The basic syndrome of a sick society is that God within the soul of man is imprisoned within a mind and body not trained to release the potential of that soul. This restlessness of soul produces all types of psychological problems. The age we live in has extroverted itself to the point where our technology and ease of living has not only dried up our strong muscular resources, the health and vitality of the physical man, but has also momentarily crippled the spiritual faculties of our inner nature. The imbalance has caused man to rush forward to conquer new fields of a technological science in which we already excel, in the hope of thereby improving the quality of life. But all that is accomplished is a widening imbalance. Dissatisfaction with the failures of orthodoxy to solve man's self-created problems has led many to sever all ties with the past with a view to creating a new world. These are ready to wipe clean the slate of our cultural heritage and start all over again. It is hard to see the forest for the trees. We tend to amplify human failure. At the same time, we all struggle for personal success. Obviously, at the physical level, individual life must come to an end. Yet the planetary body, the solar system, the vast revelations through the cosmic window, appearing in interstellar space, remain active and vibrant. Long after contemporary man has vanished, the light of far-off worlds still pours through the lenses of our telescopes, and the awesome vision of our microscopic world remains. They say that man is the greatest triumph in the universe, that he has the greatest potential for genius, yet his tenure upon the planetary body is short in comparison even to the tree he may plant in his own backyard. We dare to postulate that man's purpose is eternal. We believe that in the search for purpose, we cannot overlook our universe or the microcosmic world of self. Both are permeated with a masterful, inherent wisdom and direction. This the Chinese philosophers refer to as the eternal Tao. Few realize that man is a dual creation. Made first in God's image, he is a spiritual being hidden in a tent of matter. As a part of his divine nature, he was endowed with the free will that enables him to realize his potential, not as a puppet to the Creator's will, but as a co-creator with him. By choosing wisely, not egotistically, man is raised spiritually into that dominant position for which his soul was originally destined. Second, man has a pseudo-image that he calls himself, which he created after his fall from grace by entangling himself in the stereotypes of the pseudo-images of others. He identifies more and more with the unreal and less with his real self. We believe that when the truth is known, that the words of John, all things were made by him, and without him was nothing made that was made, will reveal man made in the divine image, in the role of the universal Christ, the Lamb slain by human misunderstanding from the foundation of the world. The reason man has continued to slay the Lamb of his true self is reflected in his failure to accept the pure and innocent vestments of perfection God has offered him as the best gifts of life. We cannot overlook in this duality the fact that out of either the correct use or misuse of his free will, man has evolved a secondary identity apart from the person made in the divine image, which is his real self. There exists then in each man behind the veil of flesh the individual, triumphant, eternal God. Call him what you will. There also exists the temporal image of man with its constant, sometimes questionable ability to change and adapt itself to environmental stresses, human anathemas, and applause. Thus, the constancy of his divine immutability and his own relative inconstancy stand side by side, almost as two faces of Janus. He sees the frivolous, mass-produced world of modern man reflected against the magnificent cadences of the Psalms of David, the genius of Lao Tzu, the eternal calm of the Buddha of the East, or the delightful wisdom of Confucius. Memorable above all, however, is the mission that was fulfilled 2,000 years ago by beloved Jesus the Christ, with his triumph, his example, and his universal mastery in the image of divine tradition, commanding the winds and the waves. By stilling the tides of his own emotional energy and the flow of his own thoughts, he fulfilled the uniqueness of his mission as the great exemplar. His victory remains the hope of the world. Yet it is not a permanent victory unless we relate our own Christ potential to the only begotten of the Father. These postulations form the premise from which the Summit Lighthouse has successfully shown the way to thousands. Mazzini correctly said, "Life is a mission. Because all have one source, all may thereby discover and fulfill the uniqueness of their appointed mission." This mission, the Summit Lighthouse helps all to find. But the benign examples are few in number compared to the many aggressive, ruthless, and vivid, off-the-track life portrayals such as Genghis Khan, Nero, Machiavelli, Attila the Hun, and Adolf Hitler. All around us today are examples of human lust, greed, political cowardice, and our own faithlessness reflected in the faithlessness of some of our public servants. In secular history, and even in the history of the church, there exist woeful failures. Yet these are of the human and not of the divine. One of the most beautiful statements of the Master Jesus was his compelling expose of the nature of divine love. The Son of Man is come to save that which was lost. As the Good Shepherd, he portrayed one who leaves the 99 to go in search of the lost lamb of his fold. Christ stood then as the goal of each man and woman, reveals a search and a mission for the individual soul who has lost his way in the duality of the lesser or pseudo-image. The role of the good physician will remain until the last knee has bowed to God and to Christ, a necessary function of personal redemption. Going into all the world and telling the good news of the divine intent must become the calling of all who truly serve humanity's needs. Just what is the divine intent for every man, and how is it to be implemented, was taught by Jesus to his disciples. Many of his words were either lost or not recorded. It is the purpose of the Summit Lighthouse to bring his teachings to mankind regardless of their faith, creed, or race. To the words of the old maxim, "Honi soit qui mal y pense," evil be to him who evil thinks, we add, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. When we see Christ as he truly is, we become one with him. The power of visualization applies to spiritual as well as material matters. To draw down heavenly matrices and make them practical in daily life We must concentrate or meditate upon the nature of Christ. And then we must imitate his qualities and character. His physical appearance is unimportant when compared with the workings of his consciousness, his healing compassion, and scientific power. We need to see him as he is in order to become like him. Failure to see is failure to be. In order to serve our fellow men, we must be willing to relate the true image of both ourselves and others to the exalted image of Christ. For only then will we hear the blessed benediction, I was a-hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. What then is the role of the Summit Lighthouse in the world? How does it fit into the world scheme? How does it serve man today? In order to explain the purpose of the Summit Lighthouse, we must introduce what to some of you may be a new concept, the concept of hierarchy. For it is hierarchy that is behind the Summit Lighthouse. Organization in the affairs of men is an aspect of hierarchy. The natural order also reflects hierarchy. We see it in the organization of the atom and in our solar system. We see it in the city-like complexities of the molecule and in the living cell. All of matter is fearfully and wonderfully organized. By induction, we conclude that if order is the foundation of the physical universe, then it is also the foundation of the spiritual. We call this spiritual order and those masterful beings who fill its offices hierarchy. Mystics and philosophers have long postulated the existence of order, not only in the material world, but also in the spiritual. St. Augustine, in his City of God, speaks of the order of angels. Origen and other Christian theologians, drawing upon both Old and New Testament texts and their own religious experience, have mentioned the existence of a spiritual body that governs the affairs of heaven. In addition to these references to the heavenly hosts, which permeate our Western tradition, Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Islam, Judaism, Confucianism, Taoism, all acknowledge the existence of greater and lesser spiritual beings who inhabit the invisible world and whose responsibilities in the government of heaven in many respects parallel those carried out in the governments of earth. Since the fall of man, contact with the members of the spiritual hierarchy has been maintained through prophets, sages, and avatars appointed by God to preserve the continuity of his will upon earth. At this point, I would like to mention to you that my real name is Prophet, this having no particular significance. I just happen to be born with it. Through them, that is, through the prophets and sages, the gears of eternity mesh with the gears of time. Forever may seem unimportant to us now, but the gears of time derive their power to move from eternal sources. Each day, each life, as its moment flows, becomes a component of forever. As Khalil Gibran says in The Prophet, life is conceived in the mist, quote, time the unformed, and not in the crystal, time the formed. And who knows, but a crystal is mist in decay. To possess the spirit of prophecy is to know, to dare, and usually to keep silent. But today, heaven dares to speak to man, to make known the law that illumines the pages of time with the opportunities of eternity. Thus, hierarchy maintains the thread of contact between God and man. Hierarchy proposes to explain the mysteries of life in a childlike way, showing through the explanation of re-embodiment that man has lived before, that those things which he has done of good in the past benefit him still, and that the evil seed sown will return to him for redemption and requalification. Hierarchy teaches that man is more electronic than he is physical, that his acts register his thoughts and feelings upon the very flesh he wears, that even physical age and the erosions of wrong thinking can be smoothed out by vital charges of spiritual power and energy from higher levels, that these charges, measurable in some instances with instruments in our laboratories, affect the brain, the mind, the nerves, the heart, the vitality, and even the personality of man. The Summit Lighthouse is under the direction of that aspect of hierarchy known as the Great White Brotherhood. Its publications, training courses, and conferences provide an effective program that has helped people of all ages to find the thread that unravels the manifold mysteries of life and to find reunion with God. God, in speaking to man today through hierarchy, inspires certain embodied representatives. Mrs. Prophet and I, before we met, were contacted many years ago by the Brotherhood and asked to serve as amanuenses to receive written and spoken communications from the Masters of Wisdom. These are always given from the conscious level and never from a trance state. The teachings of the hierarchy released through the Summit Lighthouse are published in the Keepers of the Flame lessons and weekly letters called Pearls of Wisdom. These are dictated, these lessons, by the Ascended Masters. They are the practical manifestation of the Great White Brotherhood's marvelous blueprint for man's deliverance in this day and age. They show the way out of the human dilemma, how to consume past karmic records by the application of the scientific principle of the violet transmuting flame, how to create the protective currents of a white tube of light around the physical form, how to store in the great causal body of man the treasures of heaven. Jesus spoke of this. And how to draw forth these treasures when you need them. Here is what we have called the chart of your divine self. It shows the relationship of each man to his God. The upper figure symbolizes what we call the God presence. It is surrounded by 7 concentric rings or spheres of electronically vibrating light called the causal body. This focus of the one God abides from 7 to 70 feet above our heads, each one of us. And we are attached to it by our own umbilical cord called the crystal cord of light. The electronic energy of the presence descends as an eternally moving stream which enters our bodies through the head and is ours to use creatively according to our free will. All energy passes through the divine mediator or the universal Christ individualized. We term this second figure the Holy Christ Self. The lower figure in the chart, standing in a pillar of violet transmuting flame, represents the individual monad, man. The crystal cord descends from the Holy Christ Self through the medulla oblongata. Surrounding the lower figure, inside the tube of light, is the invoked radiance of the 7th principle of the color rays, the spectrum of light known as violet. The tube of light, when properly called forth, and the violet transmuting flame are the greatest assistants that man can ever have. The reason this is so is because they enable him to function at will from the level of either the Holy Christ Self or the divine presence. God individualized can then flow. See, that's the divine Tao, the flow. unmitigated into the chalice of individual identity. The masters explain how the slings, this is what Shakespeare calls it, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, the invasions of our privacy, the psychic domination and tyranny that either the mass consciousness or retrograde man or our own subconscious miasma of misery and deceit emanates can be stopped effectively by an invocation to our own divine presence. They reveal the mountaintop experience of meditation and all oneness with God, how to shut the human door or go into a closet, teaching that total withdrawal is an experience that must be followed by a practical return of service to life. Arnold Toynbee, the great historian, pointed out this motif of withdrawal and return in his writings. The masters explain how to hurdle imperfection, arriving in consciousness at a state of divine righteousness, a divine perfection. And this perfection is not based on human self-righteousness. It's based on divine righteousness. They teach the true role of the ego in life, how and why it was created, how it should be used, what it can do, and what it ought not to do. These may be said to be the primary teachings of the Summit Lighthouse. The weekly pearls of wisdom are sent to anyone, free for the asking. Cassette recordings and phonograph records of the Master's dictations are available. We pray for the sick and afflicted in all types of human situations, and our rehabilitation program for young people who have been on drugs has resulted in many discoveries of personal assistance to humanity. Our total program involves itself in fascinating methods based upon the dual and triune nature of both man and God. It is our belief that man is Prometheus bound, that much of his temporal failure of purpose and spiritual failure is in his materialistic sense. Jesus said, "A man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth." Yet he also said, "I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly." It is fallacious to suppose that whereas man has tampered with everything else, with politics, with education, with commerce, and with science, he has failed to tamper with the Holy Scriptures. Many Orthodox people today believe that God has instituted a special hand of protection over the sacred writings of the Scriptures. Why then is the admonishment included in the book of Revelation, quote, "If any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. And if any man shall take away from the words of this book, of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book," unquote. Furthermore, it is not borne out in life that changes have not been instituted in the Scriptures, or are they lacking in contradiction. Yet thousands of people, millions of people believe that the final proof of everything is the written word. The Bible itself says clearly that the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. Hence the Bible of nature, the Bible of reality, the Bible of fact, the living word, the stones that cry out should also be considered. Paul said, "To be carnally minded is death, to be spiritually minded is life and peace." Those who would pervert and change everything, including secular history, have distorted the image of God in man's mind, reducing truth to a creed to be believed or a concept to be theorized. In this connection, it is sad but true that early councils of the church created various distortions in dogma, which have resulted in many misunderstandings concerning the mission of the Christ. Today and for thousands of years, men and women have thought in terms of smallness and greatness of being. their own disenfranchising sense, their sense of sin, of individual and of racial and national guilt, has created phobias and complexes, often referred to by our psychologists and psychiatrists. It has created giant knots of roughness in our consciousness and affairs. As Yeats said, "And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born?" We are rightly concerned with our present era, for this is where the ship of time is. This is where it's at. And we are on deck, on stage. There is a widening Babel echoing in our land and assaulting our ears. Our outreach seeks to enliven the vision of man, to increase both individual and collective contact, in effect by honoring the concept of the second coming of Christ as a gift to all ages. Not that we have no hope or belief that if God wills it so, he cannot send him forth in a physical second coming, even today. But we are aware also that he has said, "I come as a thief in the night. All who will may receive him today." Recognizing our hour of darkness and the hope in the light of God that does not fail, we feel that the Christ, the Christos, or universal light, comes to every man who will receive him still, to aerate his obscurity, to bring the holy seeds of truth into the bower of his being, to brighten the light of the sun and the crowning glory of nature, to enable him to live with his fellow men as a house of light rather than darkness, to choose this day that we will serve the light, to choose the miracle of right purpose within the power and scope of our cosmically gilded vision, the role we are to play upon the stages of life in the universal drama of beingness. The summit recognizes that there is a divine summit in every individual and throughout society, that it is our solemn duty and responsibility to seek this summit of our identity rather than gravely fall into the slot of stereotype mediocrity. Prometheus bound must be unbound. The long and painful stress of crucifixion must be lifted from our view of a triumphant Christ, yea, of a triumphant God-man. The crown of thorns must be replaced by the crown of life. It is said that modern man would no longer crucify the Christ upon a cross of wood. For the story has been told that when Christ came to Birmingham, England, and stood beside the wall, the sunlight faded into gray and the rains came. With extended hands pleading, he stretched forth his assistance to passers-by who ignored him. When morning came, Christ was found in Birmingham, frozen stiff against the wall of men's indifference. This modern man does not of necessity crucify him, but through indifference effectively slays his purposes. Because we accentuate the ascension of Jesus Christ from Bethany's hill as the real purpose God intends for every man, we call those who have been victorious in life, who are the joint heirs with Christ, who have mastered their lives in the past, ascended masters. These have not left the stage of life, but have ascended to higher planes, from whence, under divine direction, they fulfill the Master's statements, "The works that I do shall ye do also, and greater works than these shall ye do." The only sacrifice God requires of man, or ever required, is that he sacrifice his puny concepts and the weaknesses of his human nature, that he give them up for the abundant life promised by Christ. No man is an island, yet billions of people live as an island of isolation. Feeling themselves in constant competition, they clog the arteries of living with their petulancy and unawareness of opportunity. We suspect that ignorance of cosmic law is the culprit. The Summit Lighthouse seeks to rejoin the individual islands to the mainland of divine wholeness. We conceive of an eternity in which man continues to progress. There is no ultimate in the universe. Some think of infinity as though it were the end of a line. We see it as the beginning of an endless cycle, an enlarging of a circle, each circle joining to an ever-rising spiral. In an apocalyptic sense, there will emerge eventually out of the melting pot of mass humanity not only a semblance of order, but a heavenly order on earth as envisioned by the saints. Experience will bring both individual and universal problems to humanity for solution. In the words of the gurus of the East, this is our planetary karma, which can be overcome by divine duty, the essence of world dharma. Malleability is necessary if we are to receive and use our individual potential and our sanity. Above all, we must not allow ourselves to be emotionally or mentally divided. The world harbors a variety of opinions about everything. We should strive earnestly first, before allowing ourselves to be disturbed by the parade of strange happenings upon the stage of life, to become acquainted with the divine origin of the will of God. Jesus said, "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there ye may be also." In this beautiful sense of divine omnipotence, securing for us a divine abode, in the opening of the windows of our faith, in the feeding of our soul with eternal hopes, in our corrected vision of a new order of the ages, we may choose to walk in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. When we do, sooner or later, we will come to a narrow door through which only the divine image, the image of perfection, can pass. The kingdom of heaven that is within us refuses to be bound. God may be in the box, but he is also outside the box. We must identify with immortality, as we have identified with mortality. We must not allow a tidbit of time to override the eternal nature of our being and aeons of preparation for the coming of the cosmic diorama to our life, to our view. By grace and the love of the universal Christ, the brotherhood of mankind under the fatherhood of God must close the Pandora's box of hatred, viciousness, and deceit, or the grasping of paltry devices by the meager and transitory physical man. The release of the unfailing light of hope is the transcendent glory for an age when perfect love can and does cast out all fear and its attendant torment. Now, at a time when universal values, respect for man, respect for ourselves, and respect for the plans of God that once moved the patriarchs are being eroded and lost, we must build a new world based upon ascended master concepts rather than upon questionable contemporary values. We can and must reestablish the kingdom of heaven upon this earth. Fear not that God's plan, when finalized, will worsen our lot. It can only improve life, and that is joy beyond telling. In the final apocalyptic vision we read, quote, "The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ." Only in the universal sense can this be so. For Christ is the Christ of the ages, representing the image of God to every man. Those come late in time can behold him, for every eye shall see him, and they also that blasphemed and cursed him. But he is the firstborn of God, the solar logos, the unconquered and conquering light. Through him, as the universal man into whose consciousness we may all drink, we may find our linkage with spirit, and thus with the first moment of creation. Made a little lower than the angels, we are crowned with glory and honor. We will be raised up and ascended to meet the Lord in the air, not cast down in the error of our ways. The dream of a spiritual Camelot is before us still, with its flower of spiritual knighthood and chivalry. In the vision of our future, we see men not competing with one another anymore, but with yesterday's lesser state of perfection in themselves. After all, man may not be childish, but as he stands before the awesome vastness in our heavenly window, he may from time to time, in a childlike manner, in sweet humility, feel as Longfellow described in his poem to a child. But lo, thy door is left ajar, thou hearest footsteps from afar, and at the sound thou turnest round with quick and questioning eyes, like one who in a foreign land beholds on every hand some source of wonder and surprise, and restlessly, impatiently, thou strugglest to be free. The four walls of thy nursery are now like prison walls to thee. No more thy mother's smiles, no more the painted tiles delight thee, nor the playthings on the floor that won thy little beating heart before. Thou strugglest for the open door.